In a desolate desert, a baby boy roams aimlessly, wearing a soiled diaper, munching on snacks, and calling out for his mother. Abandoned by his own mother for being a boy, this is the third day he's been left to fend for himself in the wilderness. Meanwhile, a man named Paul drives into the desert, eager to capture the rare beauty of a total solar eclipse. After waiting 5 hours and successfully photographing the event, Paul prepares to leave, but stumbles upon the lost child. The boy, seemingly confused and scared, claims to have lost his parents. Feeling a surge of compassion, Paul offers to help him find them, but instead of accepting, the boy walks in the opposite direction, towards an area with no cell signal. Paul's concern gets the better of him, and he decides to follow. Paul questions the boy about his parents, but the boy only asks for water, drinking it all in one go before running off again. Paul, now unsure of what to do, decides to head back to his car, only to realize he's lost his way as the night falls. Exhausted, he spots a small cabin in the distance with a ladder leading down from the rocky terrain above. He approaches, knocking loudly on the door, but there's no response. Entering cautiously, he finds a woman cooking inside. The woman claims to live alone and offers Paul some food, but he's too tired to eat and only asks for water. After gulping it down, Paul tries to make small talk, but the woman remains silent, merely listening without engaging. Paul, drained from the day's events, decides to rest there for the night. The next morning, Paul finds the woman still asleep and leaves some money on the table, intending to head out. But as he steps outside, he notices the ladder is gone, leaving only the top half attached to the rocks. Confused and frustrated, he returns to the cabin, where the woman is still asleep. Not wanting to disturb her, he begins photographing the strange symbols on the walls. When the woman wakes, Paul asks about the missing ladder, but she calmly explains that someone else might have borrowed it and it could be back tomorrow or the day after. With no other way out, Paul attempts to climb the rock face, but halfway up, he realizes there's no stable footing and his calls for help go unanswered. Defeated, he returns to the cabin where the woman unexpectedly demands his dirty clothes, warning that his wife wouldn't be happy to see him in such a state. Paul, confused, tells her he has no wife and just wants to leave as soon as possible. Days pass, and Paul grows more desperate. He searches the cabin for tools to help him escape, but ends up injuring himself severely during a failed climb. The woman tends to his wounds, but the situation becomes increasingly surreal. Paul's dreams are haunted by strange visions of a child and the woman's eerie rituals where she smears blood on the walls, a practice that seems to have been going on for some time. As Paul slowly recovers, he discovers the ladder remains missing, driving him to confront the woman. He grabs her, demanding to know how to escape, but she remains silent, unmoved by his anger. Suddenly, voices from above catch Paul's attention. Two figures appear, offering to pull him up with a rope if he answers a simple question. "What's your favorite color?" Bewildered but desperate, Paul replies, "Red." The figures promise to fetch a rope and return soon. Relief washes over Paul as the rope is lowered. He ties it securely around himself, ready to be rescued. But as he's being lifted, the rope suddenly jerks, and Paul is left hanging in midair. Panic sets in as he shouts for help, but his strength fades quickly under the scorching sun. Just as he's about to pass out, a stream of liquid hits his face. It's the people above, mocking him by urinating on him. 6 figures, including the boy Paul met earlier, emerge and begin violently shaking the rope. Paul, in his final moments of consciousness, calls out to the woman for help. She intervenes, but Paul's ordeal leaves him unconscious. When Paul awakens, he's back in the cabin, with the woman showing concern that feels disturbingly genuine. He stumbles outside, falling to his knees and begging for divine intervention. The woman follows, explaining that they are all trapped wanderers of the desert. She urges Paul to accept his fate and stop resisting, warning him that stubbornness will only leave him with nothing. Days turn into weeks. The woman reveals she's pregnant with Paul's child, but doesn't expect him to take responsibility. Life continues, and Paul tries to make the best of his situation, even planting a garden. He forms an uneasy bond with a boy named Tom, one of the figures from above. Tom, fascinated by Paul's efforts, promises to bring him supplies on his next visit, including Paul's favorite soda. One day, Paul finds an old photograph of a woman, which the lady in the cabin says is her first mother. The conversation grows even stranger as she talks about how much that mother loved her, just as she will love the child growing inside her. Paul begins to realize that escape might be impossible. He watches as his garden grows, but his dreams of freedom fade. As more time passes, Paul's frustration leads to a bitter confrontation with the woman. He accuses her of being complicit in the horrors he's experienced, but she dismisses his concerns, claiming he never had a choice in the matter. The desert, she says, is their home, and resistance is futile. Then, one night, Paul's camera captures an image of a solar eclipse, bringing a brief moment of joy as the woman listens to the recorded sounds of his car radio. This fleeting happiness, however, however, is shattered the next morning when Paul finds Tom's lifeless body hanging from the rocks. The woman's grief is palpable, but she directs her anger at Paul, blaming him for Tom's death. The days turn darker as Paul is confined to a cage, treated like an animal. Months pass, and Paul spots a young girl in the distance. He tries to communicate with her, hoping for rescue, but she's quickly caught and killed in front of him. The brutal reality of his situation finally breaks him. During a surreal ritual, Paul is offered fruit by one of the men above, only to fall into a drugged sleep. He awakens to find the woman preparing for childbirth. Desperate to escape, Paul sees the ladder restored to its full length and makes a break for it, leaving the woman behind. But as he reaches the halfway point, he hears the cries of a newborn baby. Against his better judgment, he returns to help. Holding the baby in his arms, Paul realizes he's become part of this twisted family. The woman, satisfied that her mission is complete, coldly stabs Paul, ending his life. The next day, she neatly folds his clothes and places them in a chest, ready for the next victim. Outside, Paul's body lies untouched, feeding the desert that claimed him.